I must say the returns this quarter were exceptional.
Good heavens, who is that woman on the stairs?
Alistair, it's me. I've come back. I've brought your son. Keep hold of my hand.
I have warned you, Mrs. Davies.
Who is that?
If you've ever loved someone who wore a different face in public than the one they wore with you, you already know how this story feels before I even say a word. Welcome back to The Duke's Obsession. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we tell the kind of stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Stories about power, pride, and the people who love us anyway. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Now let's begin. The ballroom at Ashcombe Hall was built to make people feel small. 40-foot ceilings, gold leaf on every cornice, a staircase that curved down into the room like it was daring you to trip in front of 300 witnesses. Tonight, it was full. Dukes and duchesses, bankers pretending to be aristocrats, aristocrats pretending they weren't broke, and somewhere in the middle of it, the man everyone had actually come to see. Duke Alistair Renford stood near the far window with a glass of champagne he had no intention of drinking, nodding at people whose names he'd already forgotten. Beside him, his intended bride, Lady Priscilla Ashworth, laughed at something her mother said, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight every time she moved her head. It was, by every measure society respected, a perfect match. Land joined to land, title joined to title. Nobody in that room was asking whether Alistair actually wanted this. Nobody ever did. He wasn't a cruel man. People who knew him only from afar assumed he was cold, but the truth was simpler and sadder than that. He had learned a long time ago that wanting things out loud got them taken from you. So he'd stopped wanting things out loud. He smiled when he was expected to smile. He agreed when agreement was easiest. And 3 months ago, when his father's health failed and the estate's debts came due, he'd agreed to marry a woman he'd known for exactly 6 weeks, because that was what dukes did. You've probably known someone like this. Maybe you've been someone like this. The person who's so good at managing everyone else's expectations that they forget to check in with their own. Who says I'm fine so often, it stops being a lie and starts being a reflex. Alistair had built an entire life out of that reflex. The engagement to Priscilla wasn't cruelty toward her, and it wasn't even really ambition. It was a man on autopilot, doing the next expected thing because the alternative, sitting still long enough to ask himself what he actually wanted, had become unbearable 5 years earlier, for reasons this room was about to find out. He was mid-sentence, mid-nod, mid-performance, when the doors at the top of the staircase opened without an announcement. That never happened at Ashcombe Hall. Every guest was announced. It was one of those unspoken rules nobody wrote down because nobody imagined it being broken. A woman stood at the top of the stairs in a plain gray traveling coat that had clearly seen a long road, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been older than 4. The boy had dark curls and was looking around the ballroom with the wide, unimpressed curiosity that only children have in rooms built to impress adults. The orchestra kept playing. Most of the room hadn't noticed yet, but the people closest to the stairs went quiet, the way a crowd does right before something happens that it will talk about for years. Alistair didn't look up. He was still nodding at Lord Ashworth's comment about the harvest, still holding his untouched champagne, still performing the version of himself this room required. The woman came down the stairs slowly, the boy's small hand tucked into hers, and stopped at the edge of the dance floor, close enough now that the silence had spread to nearly a third of the room. Priscilla noticed first. Her laugh died in her throat. She looked at the woman, then at the boy, then, with a kind of dawning horror, at Alistair. "Alistair," she said, low, "who is that?" He finally looked up, and for one full second, before his face had time to arrange itself into anything presentable, something raw crossed it. Recognition, and beneath that, fear. Because you don't forget the face of someone you loved before you had a title to protect. You don't forget the sound of your own name, the real one, the one nobody in this room had spoken to him in 5 years. He set his glass down on a passing tray without looking at it. The room was watching him now, waiting for him to explain a stranger who had walked into his engagement ball with a child who had his exact eyes. The woman didn't wait for an introduction. She didn't curtsy. She looked straight at him, across all that gold leaf and all those watching faces, and said the one thing that would undo 5 years of careful reconstruction in a single breath. She said his real name, not Your Grace, not Duke Renford. The name his mother gave him, the name he buried the day he inherited a title he never asked for. And the room, all 300 of them, heard it. We'll get into exactly what happened next in a moment, but first, a quick reminder. If stories like this one hit something real for you, subscribe to The Duke's Obsession so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's go back. Let's find out who she really was to him, and why a name could do what a scandal couldn't. 5 years earlier, there was no Duke Renford. There was only Alistair, a second cousin twice removed from the title, a man everyone assumed would live and die a private gentleman with modest land and no particular importance. He liked it that way. Being unimportant meant being free. He'd been working the harvest at his uncle's estate that autumn, not out of necessity, but because he genuinely liked the work, liked the ache in his back at the end of a long day, liked that nobody there cared what his surname was. That was where he met Eleanor Marsh, the estate steward's daughter, who kept the accounts better than most men twice her age, and who had absolutely no patience for men who thought their bloodline excused bad manners. He remembered the first real conversation they had, an argument, actually, about whether the tenant cottages needed repairing before winter. She'd been right, he told her so, which apparently surprised her more than the argument itself. If you've ever fallen for someone specifically because they refused to be impressed by you, you already understand what happened over the following year. It wasn't sudden. It built the way real things build. A shared laugh here, a walk that went on longer than it needed to, a habit of finding reasons to be in the same room. By the following spring, he'd stopped imagining a future that didn't include her. He never told her his full family name. Not out of deception, or that's what he told himself later, but because for the first time in his life, someone loved him without knowing there was a title anywhere near his bloodline, and he was terrified of what would change if she knew. This is a pattern more common than most people admit. The fear that we're only wanted for what we have, not who we are. It's why so many people test the people they love without ever quite admitting that's what they're doing. Then his cousin, the reigning duke, died without an heir, and the letter came. He remembers standing in the estate's small kitchen reading it 3 times, because the first 2 times he was certain he'd misunderstood. He was the next in line. There was no version of the future where he could refuse it. The estate came with tenants who depended on it, debts that needed an heir's signature to restructure, a name that would simply cease to exist as a functioning household if he walked away. He told himself he'd go, settle the estate, and come back for her. He told himself a lot of things that autumn. What he didn't know, what he left before he could know, was that Eleanor was already carrying his child. She wrote to him, twice. The letters never reached him, intercepted by a household steward who had decided, without being asked, that a duke's future couldn't be complicated by a steward's daughter. By the time Eleanor realized her letters weren't being answered, pride did the rest. She wasn't going to chase a man who'd apparently gone quiet the moment his circumstances changed. She raised her son alone, worked as a governess in 3 different households to keep him fed, and told herself she'd made her peace with it. She hadn't. Not really. You don't make peace with a door that closes without explanation. You just learn to live near it. What finally brought her to Ashcombe Hall wasn't jealousy, and it wasn't money, whatever the gossip columns would later claim. It was her son, standing at a shop window 3 weeks earlier, staring at a newspaper illustration of the Duke of Renford's engagement announcement, and asking a question no 4-year-old should have to ask his mother: why does that man have my eyes? She'd spent 5 years protecting her son from a question she couldn't answer. She wasn't willing to spend a 6th. That's why she walked up those stairs. Not to ruin a wedding, to stop lying to a child who deserved better. There's a version of this story where Eleanor plans it, where she times her arrival for maximum humiliation, where the whole thing is calculated revenge dressed up as justice. That's the version that would have sold more scandal sheets. It's also not what happened. She'd actually written ahead a plain, formal letter addressed to Duke Renford, requesting a private meeting to discuss a matter concerning his family. That letter, like the 2 before it, never made it past the household's new steward, a man trained by the old one to treat anything from an unfamiliar hand as a nuisance to be filtered out. She waited 3 weeks for a reply that was never going to come, and when the engagement ball's date was printed in the county paper, the one public event she knew for certain he'd attend, she made a decision most parents will recognize even if they've never lived anything close to this story. She stopped waiting for permission to be heard. If you've ever had to raise your voice in a room that was built to make you feel like you didn't belong in it, you already understand what it took for her to walk down those stairs. It wasn't confidence. It was a mother who'd run out of quieter options. We'll pause here for a moment, because if this story is resonating with you, that's exactly why I make them. Real love rarely looks like the fairy tale version. It looks like people making hard, imperfect choices and living with the consequences. That's the Duke's Obsession. Subscribe if you want more stories that feel less like fantasy and more like the truth. Now, back to that ballroom, where a name had just been spoken, and everything was about to change. Silence has a texture when 300 people are holding their breath at once. It presses on a room. Alistair felt every eye shift between him and the woman standing at the base of the staircase. Priscilla's hand had gone rigid on his arm. Lord Ashworth's jovial expression had frozen into something calculating, the look of a man rapidly recalculating what this marriage was actually worth. "Eleanor," Alistair said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You didn't answer my letters," she said, not loudly. She didn't need to be loud. The room had gone quiet enough that a whisper would have carried. "I wrote to you twice. I want to know if you ever read them, or if you simply decided a title was worth more than an answer. I never received them." He said it too fast, and he watched her flinch at how it sounded, like an excuse rehearsed for exactly this moment, even though it was true. "Eleanor, I swear to you, I never—" "He's 4, she said, cutting through whatever he was about to build. "His name is Thomas. He has your mother's chin, and apparently your exact eyes, because 3 weeks ago he asked me why a stranger in a newspaper looked like him, and I didn't have an answer that didn't require me to lie." The boy, Thomas, had gone very still, the way children do when they sense the adults around them are having a conversation too large for the room. He looked up at Alistair with open, searching curiosity. Not fear, not yet, just the particular attentiveness of a child trying to work out whether a stranger is safe. Alistair went down on one knee. Not for Priscilla, the room would talk about that detail for weeks, but level with a boy he'd never met, whose face was doing something complicated to the part of him that had spent 5 years pretending he didn't have a heart left to break. "Hello, Thomas," he said quietly. His voice cracked on the second word, and he didn't try to hide it. Thomas studied him for a long moment. "You have my eyes," he said, matter of fact, the way children state things that adults spend hours dancing around. "I think," Alistair said, "you have mine." There's something almost unbearable about watching a grown man's composure break in front of a child too young to know what he's witnessing. A few of the guests nearest the front would later say it was the most honest they'd ever seen the Duke of Renford look. Not commanding a room, not performing certainty, just a man on his knees in front of a boy who had no idea yet how much his existence had just rearranged everything around him. Behind him, Priscilla had stepped back, her mother already at her elbow, murmuring something urgent. Lord Ashworth's face had gone from calculating to openly hostile. A broken engagement over a scandal like this would cost his family standing, and he was already working out who to blame publicly for it. "Your Grace," Priscilla said, and her voice shook with something between humiliation and fury. "Is this true?" Alistair stood. He could have lied. 5 years of practiced composure gave him every tool he needed to smooth this over, to call it a misunderstanding, to have staff quietly escort Eleanor and her son out a side door before the story calcified into something unrecoverable. It's what the old version of him, the version built entirely out of other people's expectations, would have done without hesitating. Instead, he looked at Priscilla, and then at every watching face in that ballroom, and he said the truest thing he'd said in 5 years. "It's true. I have a son. I didn't know until this moment that he existed, and that failure is mine to carry, not his mother's. I'm sorry, Priscilla. You deserve a husband who isn't already carrying a family he didn't know he had." The room erupted into the kind of hushed, urgent whispering that would become 3 days of gossip columns and a full week of scandal sheets. But Alistair wasn't listening to any of it anymore. He was looking at Eleanor, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not forgiveness. Not yet. but something that had stopped being pure anger the moment he knelt in front of their son, instead of denying him. This is where a lot of stories about pride and status get it wrong. They make the grand gesture the end of the story, when really it's just the beginning of the hard part. Confessing the truth in public is one thing. Rebuilding 5 years of missed birthdays, missed first steps, and a mother who raised a child completely alone, that takes a lot more than one honest sentence in a ballroom. Before we continue, if you're the kind of person who believes accountability matters more than image, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe to The Duke's Obsession, and let's see what Alistair does next. Because saying the right thing in front of an audience is easy. Living up to it afterward is where the real story starts. The gossip sheets had their headline within a day, "The Duke's Secret Son." By the end of the week, half the drawing rooms in the county had an opinion about Eleanor Marsh, most of them unkind, all of them speculating on details nobody actually knew. This part of the story doesn't get told as often, because it's less dramatic than a ballroom confession. But it's the part that actually matters. Public honesty is a single moment. Private repair is a long, unglamorous process, and Alistair had years of it ahead of him. He didn't ask Eleanor to move into Ashcombe Hall right away, and to her credit, she wouldn't have accepted if he had. Instead, he found her and Thomas a comfortable home on the estate's edge, close enough that he could see his son without upending the boy's entire life overnight. Far enough that Eleanor didn't feel like she was being absorbed into a household that had, 5 years earlier, made her disappear without a second thought. He came every day, not to court her. He was careful about that, painfully careful, because he understood that trust doesn't rebuild on the same timeline as attraction. He came to learn his son. To learn that Thomas hated peas and loved being read to twice through the same story before bed, that he had his mother's stubbornness and, infuriatingly, Alistair's own tendency to go quiet when he was upset, instead of saying what was wrong. It took nearly 3 months before Eleanor let him stay for dinner without an obvious reason to leave immediately after. It took another 2 before she told him, in a quiet, unguarded moment on her front step, what those 5 years had actually cost her. The governess positions she'd taken far below her ability just to keep them housed. The nights she'd sat up with a feverish toddler with no one to share the worry with. The particular loneliness of loving a child fiercely while grieving a version of a family she'd never gotten to have. He didn't defend himself while she spoke. He'd learned, slowly, that the instinct to explain yourself in the middle of someone else's pain is usually about making yourself feel better, not about actually hearing them. So he just listened, and when she finished, he said the only honest thing left to say, "I can't give you those 5 years back. I can only be present for everyone that comes after, if you'll let me." She didn't answer him that night. She didn't owe him an answer that night, or any night on his timeline instead of hers. That's a detail worth sitting with, because it's usually the part these stories skip. In most versions of this trope, forgiveness arrives on cue, right after the big speech, because that's how it works in a 2-hour film. Real repair doesn't run on that schedule. Eleanor took her time, weeks of it. Not because she enjoyed making him wait, but because she'd learned the hard way what happens when you hand your trust over before it's actually been earned back. Alistair, to his credit, never once pushed her to hurry. He'd caused this wound. He didn't get a vote on how long it took to heal. Meanwhile, the estate itself was going through its own reckoning. The steward who'd intercepted Eleanor's letters 5 years earlier, a man who'd convinced himself he was protecting the family's interests, was quietly dismissed once Alistair uncovered what had happened. It didn't undo the damage, but it mattered to Alistair that the truth of it was known, even if only within the household. Some debts you can't repay. You can only refuse to let them stay buried. The Ashworth family, for their part, made their displeasure very public for a few weeks, and then, as these things tend to go, moved on to the next scandal, because scandal always finds a new subject eventually. Priscilla, it turned out, was more relieved than heartbroken. She confided to a mutual friend, who eventually confided to half the county, that she'd never particularly wanted to marry Alistair either, and had simply been raised to believe wanting things wasn't part of the arrangement. Thomas, through all of it, adjusted the way children often do, faster than the adults around him, mostly indifferent to gossip sheets and inheritance disputes, mostly just glad to have someone new who read to him twice through the same story and never once complained about it. There was one afternoon about 4 months in that Alistair still thinks about more than almost any other. Thomas had fallen from a low garden wall he'd been told twice not to climb, split his lip, and cried the particular furious tears of a child who's more embarrassed than hurt. Eleanor was inside dealing with a leaking roof and hadn't heard. Alistair was the one who scooped him up, sat him on the kitchen step, and cleaned the cut with a handkerchief, while Thomas hiccuped through an explanation of exactly why the wall had needed climbing. It wasn't a dramatic moment. Nobody was watching. There was no ballroom, no audience, no scandal sheet writer waiting outside for a quote. But it was the moment Alistair understood, more clearly than any public confession could have taught him, what he'd actually missed during those 5 lost years. Not the milestones people write songs about, but the small, unwitnessed ones. The scraped knees, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons. The parts of a child's life that never make it into a gossip column, but are, in the end, most of what a childhood actually is. He started keeping a small notebook after that, privately, almost embarrassed by it. Dates, small details, the things Thomas said that made him laugh, the questions he asked that had no easy answers. Not for anyone else to read, just so that if he was ever tempted again to let duty crowd out the people duty was supposed to be for, he'd have proof, in his own handwriting, of exactly what he'd be choosing to lose. If any part of this feels familiar, the fear of loving someone honestly, the cost of silence, the slow work of earning back trust you broke without meaning to, that's exactly the kind of story we tell here. Make sure you're subscribed to The Duke's Obsession, because the ending of this one is worth staying for. A year passed before Alistair asked Eleanor to marry him, and when he finally did, it wasn't in a ballroom, and there were no 300 witnesses. It was on the same front step where she'd once told him exactly what those 5 lost years had cost her. Thomas was asleep inside. The evening was quiet, in the way only a life rebuilt slowly and deliberately can be quiet. "I'm not asking because it would look right," he told her. "I've spent enough of my life doing things because they looked right. I'm asking because I want to fall asleep in the same house as you and our son every night for the rest of my life. And because I hope, you might want that too, now that I've actually earned the right to ask." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, the same quiet she'd carried into that ballroom a year earlier. Except this time, it didn't have anger folded inside it. "You never told me your real name," she said finally. "Back then, I loved a man for a year, and I didn't even know his full name." "Alistair," he said, "just Alistair. That's who I was with you before any of this. That's who I'm asking you to marry now, not the Duke, him." "I know," she said, and for the first time since she'd walked down that staircase, she smiled, small but real. "I've always known which one I loved." They married quietly the following spring, in a ceremony far smaller than anything Ashcombe Hall usually hosted, with Thomas standing between them holding the rings and a small velvet box he refused to let anyone else carry. The gossip sheets covered it for a day and then found something else to talk about, which suited everyone involved just fine. Alistair kept the notebook. Years later, he'd add a second one for a daughter who came along a couple of years after the wedding, and a running joke between him and Eleanor that their children would grow up with more written evidence of their scraped knees and terrible jokes than most royal households keep of their entire family trees. It became, without either of them planning it, the real inheritance he passed down. Not the estate, not the title, but the habit of paying attention to the ordinary, unwitnessed moments that duty had once taught him to overlook. People in the county still tell the story of that engagement ball sometimes, usually with the details a little exaggerated, the dress a little grander, the silence a little longer, the confession a little more theatrical than it actually was. Alistair never corrects them. The parts that mattered were never the ones that made it into the gossip sheets anyway. They were the ones that happened afterward, on quiet front steps and kitchen floors, and Tuesday afternoons nobody was watching, which, if you think about it, is usually where the truest parts of any love story actually live. Here's what I think this story is really about. If you strip away the ballrooms and the titles, most of us aren't afraid of being loved. We're afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons. For a name, a title, a bank account, an image we've built instead of the person underneath it. Alistair spent 5 years hiding behind a name that made people want things from him. It took losing everything he thought mattered to learn that the only version of himself worth loving was the one he'd buried the moment a letter changed his life. And Eleanor? She didn't come to that ballroom for revenge, or money, or a title for her son. She came because she refused to let her child grow up not knowing the truth about where he came from. That's not weakness. That's the kind of quiet courage most love stories forget to tell you about. If this story stayed with you, you know exactly what to do. Subscribe to The Duke's Obsession. Drop a comment telling me which part hit you hardest, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that honesty, even 5 years late, is still worth more than a lifetime of comfortable silence. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.